I want to start today with a bit of a challenge.
Oh, all right. A challenge.
Yeah, it's a test of your geopolitical mental map. If you're listening, I want you to picture Asia in your head right now.
Okay, got the map loaded up.
Right. So visualize the heavy hitters. And now, I want you to point to the country that is, quietly, becoming the absolute indispensable backbone of the global AI revolution.
That's a big claim.
It is. And I need to be specific here. I'm not talking about, where the code is written in California.
Right.
And I'm not talking about where the raw silicon is smelted or where the wafers are actually printed. I'm talking about the hardware bottleneck.
The packaging.
Yes, the exact place where these chips are actually turned into usable brains for machines.
Well, just to make this challenge actually difficult for everyone listening, let's rule out the usual suspects right out of the gate.
Good idea.
Because it isn't China. It isn't Japan.
Yeah.
It definitely isn't Singapore.
Exactly. So if you're like most people, your finger is probably just hovering over the map right now, unsure where to land.
You're probably thinking Taiwan, honestly.
Right, but Taiwan is largely about the fabrication making the raw wafer. We're talking about the critical next step. The answer, surprisingly, is Malaysia.
It really is. And, honestly, for a long time, Malaysia has sort of been viewed as the middle child of Southeast Asia.
That's a perfect way to put it.
It's true. It doesn't have the immense, sprawling population size of Indonesia. It's not a giant consumer market like that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have the extreme per capita wealth of Singapore right next door. It's often just, there, solid, but frequently overlooked in the grand narrative of Asian economics.
But according to the stack of reports we're looking at today, and we are pulling from a massive, comprehensive strategic analysis titled Malaysia's Decade.
Which is packed with data from late 2025 and early 2026.
Exactly. According to this deep dive into the sources, that middle child status is entirely history.
Correct.
The mission for our deep dive today is to unpack how Malaysia managed to quietly engineer this massive economic pivot. Because they aren't just a manufacturing hub anymore.
No, they are crossing the threshold to become a high-income industrial titan by 2026.
It's wild. And there was this one aha moment in the report's statistic about their data center capacity that rivals the entire European Union that I actually circled 3 times because I thought it was a typo.
It's a staggering number, but we'll get to that.
We will. Let's start with the big picture first, because the reports describe the macroeconomic vibe of Malaysia right now as remarkably stable.
Which, let's be honest, the rest of the global economy right now feels pretty chaotic.
Highly chaotic. So
Right.
what is the actual reality on the ground there in early 2026?
The vibe is what economists essentially call boring predictability.
Boring is good.
In the current global climate, boring predictability is actually the highest compliment you can pay an economy. Look at the numbers from the third quarter of 2025. GDP hit 5.2%.
Which beat all the analyst consensus.
Every single one. And it's the consistency that matters. Looking at the forecast for 2026, everyone from the World Bank to the IMF is aligned on a growth rate between 4.5 and 5.5%.
And inflation.
Incredibly low, sitting around 1.4%. The IMF literally called the economy notably resilient to external shocks.
That is high praise from the IMF. But 5% growth isn't entirely unheard of in developing Asia, right? Why is this specific growth so significant?
Because of the threshold they're crossing. This isn't just regular growth. This is Malaysia officially hitting the World Bank's definition of a high-income nation.
Okay, let's unpack that. Because high income sounds great on a brochure, but what does it actually mean in practice?
We are talking about a nominal GDP per capita hitting that $14,000 to $15,000 range.
Right.
It changes the way the world sees you. You stop being just a place for cheap labor and cheap manufacturing. You escape the middle income trap.
The trap where you're too expensive for cheap labor but not skilled enough for high tech.
Exactly. Malaysia has broken through that ceiling, and the reports argue this absolutely didn't happen by accident.
They highlight 4 specific engines driving this, right?
Yes. 4 engines. First, electrical and electronics exports the E&E sector, which is huge. Second, massive foreign direct investment in data centers.
Which we'll definitely talk about.
Third is public investment in infrastructure, roads, rail, ports. And fourth is surprisingly resilient domestic spending.
So regular folks are spending money, the government is building trains, and foreign tech giants are bringing in billions.
That's the formula. And when 4 major institutions, the IMF, World Bank, OECD, and the local central bank all agree on a boring, positive forecast, global investors take notice. If you're a pension fund, you look at Malaysia and see a safe harbor.
Let's drill down into that first engine you mentioned, because this is the one that really cements Malaysia's place in the AI revolution, the semiconductor industry.
This silicon shield.
Right. Now, I always knew Malaysia made chips, but I'll be honest, before reading this analysis, I thought it was mostly just basic assembly. Snapping the plastic casing onto the silicon and putting it in a box.
That is the most common misconception. And to understand why it's wrong, you have to look at the history. Malaysia isn't new to this game at all.
They've been at it a while.
Over 50 years. Intel opened their first international plant in Penang way back in 1972.
Wow, 1972.
Yeah, they call Penang the Silicon Valley of the East for a very good reason. That is half a century of institutional memory.
But history alone doesn't guarantee a future. I mean, why hasn't Vietnam or India just eaten their lunch? They have way cheaper labor.
It comes down to what the analysts call the ecosystem moat.
The moat.
Right. In semiconductors, you can't just drop $1 billion factory in a brand new country and expect it to work. You need the decades of supplier relationships. You need the guys who know how to fix the highly specific machines, the chemical suppliers, the logistics firms that handle delicate wafers.
So Malaysia already has that entire plumbing system in place.
Exactly. The others are still trying to pour the concrete for the foundation.
Okay, but the tech itself has changed drastically. Moore's law, the old rule that chips get twice as fast every 2 years just by shrinking the transistors. The reports say that's basically dead.
Or dying, yes. We've hit the laws of physics on how small a transistor can be.
So how does Malaysia fit into a post-Moore's law world?
This is the crucial pivot. This is the bottleneck. Because you can't make the transistors smaller anymore. To make AI chips faster, like those massive NVIDIA chips, you have to stack them.
Stack them, like vertically.
Exactly. It's called 3D stacking, or advanced packaging. Think of it like city planning. When you run out of land on the ground, you stop building ranch houses and you start building skyscrapers.
That makes sense.
You stack memory chips and logic chips on top of each other to increase the speed and efficiency.
But I have to assume gluing microscopic billion-dollar chips on top of each other is incredibly difficult.
It's literal nanoengineering. It requires extreme precision and complex heat management. It's not just putting a plastic cover on anymore. The packaging is a critical performance booster. The packaging is the product.
And the report notes that Malaysia controls a huge chunk of this market.
13%. They control 13% of the global market for chip assembly and testing.
So if you are NVIDIA or AMD and you need your cutting-edge AI chips packaged so they actually function, you essentially have to go through Malaysia.
In many cases, you have no other choice. If Malaysia shuts down, the global AI supply chain hits a brick wall.
And the Malaysian government is fully aware of this leverage.
Oh, absolutely. That's why they launched the National Semiconductor Strategy, the NSS.
The numbers on that strategy are huge. They are targeting 500 billion ringgit in investment.
Which is roughly 110 billion US dollars.
That is a staggering amount of money. Where is that actually going?
The goal of the NSS is to shift the country up the value chain. They don't want to just assemble foreign chips forever. They want to create local Malaysian champions.
Companies that actually design the chips themselves.
Right. They have revenue targets set at 1 to 4 billion ringgit for these local design firms.
But is that realistic? Designing a chip from scratch is a whole different ballgame than packaging one, even advanced packaging.
It's a massive gamble, but they are using the revenue and the technical knowledge from their packaging dominance to fund this leap into design, and the big global players are buying in. Intel committed $7 billion to expand their advanced packaging there. Infineon and NVIDIA are pouring money in.
It's like the concept of the silicon shield, which we usually only hear about with Taiwan, has expanded.
Malaysia definitely has its own silicon shield now.
Which leads us perfectly to the second part of this tech revolution. You have the AI chips, but they have to live somewhere.
They need a home.
Right. You put them in data centers. And this is where the story shifts dramatically to the state of Johor.
Johor is having a major moment.
For anyone without a map of Malaysia handy, Johor is the state at the very southern tip of the peninsula, literally right across the bridge from Singapore. The sources talk a lot about something called the Singapore construct. Can you explain that dynamic? Because it seems to be the spark for this whole data center explosion.
Sure. So Singapore is an island, and it's a very small one. A few years ago, they literally ran out of land and power for new data centers.
They just hit the limit.
They did.
Yeah.
The government had to put a strict moratorium on building new data centers because these facilities were threatening to drain the entire national power grid. Singapore became a victim of its own success.
But the global demand for cloud computing and AI training didn't just pause because Singapore ran out of electricity.
No, the data needed a place to go. Enter Johor. It's just a kilometer away across the strait. It has plenty of land, and crucially, it has power. The spillover was almost instantaneous.
And the scale of this spillover, this is the stat I mentioned earlier. The reports say Johor has a data center pipeline of 5.7 gigawatts.
5.7 gigawatts, yeah.
I am not an electrical engineer. 5.7 gigawatts sounds like a big number, but I didn't truly grasp it until the report provided a comparison.
It's hard to wrap your head around. To put 5.7 gigawatts in perspective, that is roughly equivalent to the data center capacity of the entire European Union back in 2020.
Let that sink in for a second. One single state in Malaysia, just one province, is building out as much capacity as the entire EU had just a few years ago.
They are building continental-scale digital infrastructure inside a single state.
I mean, I have to play the skeptic here. Is this real? Or is this just a bunch of memorandums of understanding on paper that will never actually get built?
It's a fair question because pipelines often get inflated, but look at the players involved. Microsoft, Google, AWS, ByteDance, they were already there, pouring billions into the ground. Construction is actively underway.
Wow.
And to make the whole process frictionless, Malaysia and Singapore launched the Johor-Singapore Special Economic Zone, the JSSEZ.
Bureaucrats love their acronyms.
Well,
what does the JSSEZ actually do in practice?
It effectively treats Singapore and Johor as one unified economic zone. It's a lot like the relationship between Manhattan and New Jersey.
Okay, I see.
A global company can keep its corporate headquarters, its high finance, and its legal teams in Singapore, which has a world-class regulatory environment. But they can put the heavy hardware, the massive server farms, across the bridge in Johor, where land is cheap.
So it completely removes the risk discount that international investors might normally apply when entering a developing market. You get Singaporean legal safety with Malaysian cost structures.
It is quite literally the best of both worlds.
But there is a massive catch here, isn't there? Data centers are incredibly power hungry. A single AI training facility uses as much power as a mid-sized city.
They are energy vacuums.
So if Malaysia is building 5.7 gigawatts of capacity, where's all that electricity coming from? Because if they power this with coal, doesn't the whole premise fall apart?
That is the critical vulnerability. If this becomes a coal-powered cloud, Western tech companies will walk away.
Because of their climate pledges.
Exactly. Google, Microsoft, AWS, they all have strict 100% renewable energy mandates for their shareholders. They cannot legally or ethically set up shop where the power is dirty.
They can't just plug into a coal plant in Indonesia or Vietnam, no matter how cheap the real estate is.
They can't. And this is where Malaysia's green advantage comes into play. Unlike some of its neighbors, Malaysia actually has a highly credible energy transition plan called the NET-TR.
And they also have Sarawak, right?
Yes. Sarawak, over on the island of Borneo, has massive, massive hydropower resources. Specifically, the Bakun Dam. It acts as a giant green battery for the country.
So they can route that clean energy to the tech hubs.
Yes, it allows the government to offer green tariffs. They can sell certified, verifiable, renewable energy directly to these tech giants.
So Malaysia can basically look at big tech and say, come here. We have the land, we have the chips, and we have the clean power to keep your board of directors happy.
Precisely. It turns their geography and their green grid into a decisive competitive advantage.
I want to zoom out a bit to the geopolitical stage, because we have to talk about the elephant in the room. Trade wars.
Always a factor.
The sources analyze this specifically in the context of the 2025 tariff scares, the so-called Liberation Day tariffs, and the ongoing friction between the U.S. and China. How is Malaysia navigating this? Because they seem like they could easily get crushed between these two giants.
They are walking a very delicate tightrope. The diplomatic term is the middle path.
The middle path.
Right. When the new U.S. administration started threatening massive tariffs in 2025, there was genuine panic that export economies in Asia would be decimated. But remember that silicon shield we talked about?
The advanced packaging bottleneck.
Yes. The U.S. tech giants, Apple, NVIDIA, Intel, they are entirely dependent on the Malaysian packaging supply chain.
Ah.
So if Washington slaps a punishing tariff on Malaysian tech exports, they are effectively crippling their own most valuable companies. It provides Malaysia with a massive level of immunity.
It's a hostage situation, almost. You need us as much as we need you.
It's intense leverage. And then you look at the China factor. Malaysia plays both sides beautifully. The report notes that China is actually Malaysia's largest trading partner for goods.
But the U.S. is the largest investor in their tech sector.
Exactly. They act as this neutral ground. It's a place where Chinese raw materials and components can safely meet Western technology demands without any of the political baggage of doing business directly in the U.S. or China.
They're the Switzerland of the chip war.
That's a great analogy. Plus, they have diversified their trade deals. They are members of the CPTPP, which is the big Trans-Pacific Partnership, and the RCEP, the Asian Partnership.
So if one trade bloc gets hostile, they just pivot to the other.
Exactly. They refuse to put all their eggs in either the American or the Chinese basket.
Now, all this infrastructure and geopolitical maneuvering is fascinating. But let's talk about the human element. Because for decades, the narrative around Malaysia was the brain drain.
The famous talent leak to Singapore?
Right. If you were a smart, talented engineer in Malaysia, you moved across the border to make 3 times the money. Is the report saying that is finally changing?
The data strongly suggests a reverse brain drain is underway. And it really just comes down to the math. Wages in Penang for specialized engineers are skyrocketing. The reports show salaries hitting 8,000 to 15,000 ringgit a month.
Which is a huge jump domestically, but in absolute US dollars, that's still lower than a Singaporean salary.
It is, but you have to factor in the cost of living. Rent in Penang is a tiny fraction of what it is in Singapore. A decent apartment in Singapore might run you $3,000 or $4,000 a month.
Easily.
In Penang, you can live in a luxury high-rise for $600. You can afford to buy a house. You can own a car.
So the value proposition for a young professional has completely flipped. It's not just about the raw paycheck anymore. It's about the quality of life you can buy with it.
Exactly. Malaysian talent is looking at the board and saying, why should I struggle in a shoebox apartment in Singapore when I can live incredibly well in Penang and work on the exact same cutting-edge AI technology?
That reverse brain drain is such a powerful indicator of a maturing economy. And speaking of maturity, the sources highlight a recent move by the Malaysian government regarding subsidies. The report actually calls it politically suicidal.
Yes, the fuel subsidy rationalization. This is a fascinating piece of political economy.
What exactly did they do?
For decades, the Malaysian government heavily subsidized petrol. It was incredibly cheap for citizens at the pump, but it was costing the state roughly 40 billion ringgit every single year.
40 billion.
It was known as the third rail of Malaysian politics. You touch the cheap gas, you lose your job.
Because taking away cheap gas is universally a recipe for riots.
But the current government, operating under what they call the Madani framework, actually did it. They bit the bullet and cut the blanket subsidies to save that money.
How did they survive the backlash?
They were highly strategic. They rolled out a massive database system called PADU. This allowed them to ensure that the lower-income citizens still received targeted cash transfers to offset the gas prices, while the wealthy and foreigners had to pay the actual market rate.
So they essentially used data mining to avoid a political crisis.
They did. And the IMF specifically called this out for praise. They highlighted the government's fiscal prudence. By saving that 40 billion ringgit, they freed up a massive amount of capital that is now being pumped directly into tech and infrastructure.
Instead of literally burning it in car engines.
Exactly. It signals to the world that Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim's government is prioritizing long-term economic health over short-term populist votes. That political stability is a stark contrast to the leadership chaos we often see in neighboring countries like Thailand or the Philippines.
And if you're a foreign investor looking to park $10 billion in a country for the next 20 years, boring, stable politics is exactly what you want.
Boring makes money.
So let's try to synthesize all of this. The deep dive outlines what we can call the 5 decisive advantages.
Let's hear them.
1. The semiconductor moat. 50 years of institutional history leading to their dominance in advanced packaging.
Check.
2. AI infrastructure scale. That mind-bending 5.7 gigawatt data center pipeline in Johor.
Check.
3. Macro stability, predictable GDP growth, low inflation, and fiscal prudence.
Right.
4. The human element, a multilingual workforce coming home to higher wages and better living standards.
Yes.
And 5. The Singapore Spillover, brilliantly turning their neighbors' land and power constraints into their own economic boom.
That is the complete picture. The final verdict from these reports is clear. Malaysia has quietly won the current phase of the ASEAN economic race by simply being the most reliable, indispensable option on the board.
It fundamentally challenges the mental map we started with. Malaysia is no longer the quiet middle child, it is a giant.
But that actually leads to an incredibly interesting question for the future. This is the provocative part of the analysis.
It's that.
Right now, Malaysia is the perfect helpful partner. They package the chips designed by the U.S., they host the data generated by U.S. companies, they are the ultimate service provider.
Right.
But remember the ultimate goal of the National Semiconductor Strategy we discussed.
To create local champions.
Yeah.
To design their own chips.
Exactly. Moving from the factory floor to the architect's desk. If they succeed in doing that, if Malaysia starts producing its own native chip designers that rival Western companies, they stop being just a friendly supply chain partner.
They become a direct competitor.
Yes. It's very easy to be friends with the quiet giant when they are just building your house for you. It is a very different dynamic when they decide to start building a much bigger house right next door.
That is a fascinating thought. What happens when the quiet giant decides to start speaking up and taking market share? I guess that is the geopolitical dynamic we all need to watch for the rest of this decade.
Absolutely.
Well, a massive thanks to the authors of Malaysia's Decade for compiling this incredible data, and thank you all for joining us on this deep dive. Let us know, did you guess Malaysia at the start of the show? Think about it, and we'll catch you on the next one.